and we're back. We are here talking about all things nonprofits with a super focus on strategy and fundraising. And glad to be with you for another streaming week here. This is it's going to be a busy week for us as we get going this week. We have a lot to cover as we get this particular week started. Before we get going, I want to encourage you, if you haven't done so already, get your copy of our latest book, Built to Fund, The Fundable Nonprofit. It's a workbook and a book all in one, designed to help you think through sustainable approaches as relates to raising money and building the resources and the infrastructure for your worthy cause. If you haven't gotten your book yet, all you got to do is click the link below or above, however you're streaming this particular broadcast, and we'll get you covered. You can immediately download it. You can also purchase rather a case of books, paperback, for your team. We have 10 books in a case, so it allows you to purchase 10 copies and distribute amongst your team so that you can have the resources you need to have this conversations. So now we can go ahead and work on our nonprofits together, build together, and structure the sustainability of our nonprofits together so that you all can have the success you're looking for. So go ahead and get your copy of the book, Built to Fund. It's literally right here on the side here. But let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be talking about assessing your financial reality of your nonprofit. This is a all important topic. This is a topic that I think applies to nonprofits of all types and stripes and sizes. It is not just for one nonprofit type or size. It's not for one type of nonprofit in a particular service area, but it's for all of us, right? As we think about whether you're in the baby stages, you're thinking about how you are getting up to speed and how you are getting your organization off the ground, or whether you're a mature organization. These are important topics to consider as we continue to process through what does it mean to become sustainable, and how do we build our nonprofits to become fundable and supported by our funders and our partners who are looking for us to engage deeply in the work. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I got a couple of points, and I want to walk through a research study that was done on this in a little bit, but let's talk about this. How assessing your financial reality for your organization. Now, you cannot build your fundraising plan if you don't know your starting point or the starting point of your organization. And we're talking about the financial starting point of your organization. What is the financial health of your organization? Because, as you think about the growth and what's coming and what you expect to happen for your organization, within your organization, it matters. It matters that you understand the starting point of your organization. Now, if you're in this kind of early stage of your organization, you're trying to figure out, where we are. Well, here's the truth, right? You may not have raised any significant money, right? And when we have consultations with organizations, one of the first questions that we ask is, what was the starting point of your finances from the perspective of what have you raised over the past 12 months? And that's a credible place to start. What have you raised over the past 12 months, past 24 or 36 months? This gives a trajectory of where you started and what's happening within your organization. So if you say, hey, I want to raise $500,000, but the answer to the question of what you raised over the past 12 months is zero or $10,000 or $20,000, that $500,000 really becomes unreal, right? It's not relevant to your organization if you don't have the track record. Now, there is a benefit of setting a financial goal and saying, hey, I want to raise this amount of money over the next 12 months, right? Going forward, thinking about the future. But here's the problem. When we take a step back and we start to look at what you've raised over the last 12 months, what we're struggling with and what we're trying to figure out is, well, what's the baseline that we have to justify that belief, to justify the idea that your organization can indeed raise money over that type of money over the next 12 months. So when we evaluate the current structure, part of developing the right plan, the part of developing the smartest and most strategic plan, is identifying what you've raised over the past 12 months and utilizing that as a catalyst to determine what's next. So if you don't know your starting point, it becomes a very difficult conversation. Similarly, for the more mature organizations who have been around for a while, who have raised significant amounts of money, the same question applies to you. So if you've raised over the past 12 months $2.5 million, and that's been kind of a trend for you, you have the same question, but the context is a little different. Well, what's the goal over the next 12 months? Are you looking to go up a half million, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million? And then the question becomes why? What is the justification for you to make that jump? Have you seen an increased demand from your consumer, which is your community? Have you seen an increased demand from your funder? Have you seen an increased demand from stakeholders who support the business and the organization, who cares about the topic that you work on a daily basis? And if you're not able to justify that growth based upon facts and information and feedback you're getting, then you got to ask yourself, why would we increase our fundraising goal to go up 1, 2, 3x over the next 12 months? So that is a critical question to ask yourself. And even if the answer is yes, we have justification, we have proof that people want what we have, here's the next question. How are you going to get that, right? And who's going to finance this? And how are you going to generate greater support than what you have? And the follow-up question would be, is there justification to increase the to a certain amount, right? So should you double from 2.5 to 5 million? Is that reasonable? Or should you be increasing at a much more smaller clip? Maybe it's 1.7, 1.5, 1.3x that number that will get you to where you need to be over the next 12 months. So before we even start to look at numbers down the road, we need to have a starting point of what's our current fundraising approach, what's our current capacity to raise money, what are funders saying, what are our supporters saying, what are our donors saying about our work? Are they interested in continuing to support our work? And can we continue to garner their support and count on their support going forward? Because that makes a significant difference in our ability to project out a future fundraising capacity over the next 12 months. So that's the starting point. What is our starting point of our fundraising? The next thing we got to think about is, what are the results of our key metrics, right? What are the key metrics that we're utilizing to measure success, to identify success within our organization? We talked about one of them, right? Which is, what have we raised over the last 12, 24, 36 months? Another metric to think about is, how are we doing with our donor retention rates? Are we retaining 70, 80, 90% of our donors, right? And how are we performing against our competitors who are, in some cases, receiving monies from the same donors or the same population groups? How are we doing? Well, because you cannot talk about the growth of your fundraising and expanding your fundraising plan if you continue to lose donors, lose business, right? So in the nonprofit world, your donors, they are a reflection of your ability to sustain your operations. And in pursuing new monies, particularly with grant applications and RFPs, there's going to be undoubtedly a question that you got to answer relative to this, and it's the sustainability question. And that sustainability question speaks to the number of donors that you currently have in your portfolio, number one. And then number two, what's their giving amount, right? Some funders might want to know, how long have they been a donor? And can you anticipate their ongoing financial support over the next 12 months? That sustainability question can be the difference between you securing new money or not even being considered for new money, right? So donor retention rates is super important. It is a question that you have to think about and look out for on future grant applications. And it's a part of the strategic approach you're identifying and you're determining for the success of your organization. Here's another key metric of to review for your starting point of your finances, and that is how much revenue are you bringing in compared to expenses, right? So some organizations, they target to be revenue neutral, right, to break even. Some organizations have a perspective of losing some money, right, or showing some loss, and there's some strategic approaches to that and why that might matter to some. Then there are others who are interested in having profitability, right? So keeping our costs under control while increasing our revenue, right? Because that could speak to opportunities for future investment. That could speak for opportunities towards sustainability. That can speak towards our ability to expand our capacity for future innovation, et cetera, et cetera. Some are also interested in looking at investing in their organizations by way of endowments and other revenue generating vehicles, right? So their revenue has to be at a certain rate, at a certain level. These are just a few key metrics you can look at, right, to determine what's the starting point of your current financial state of your organization. So you need to be thoughtful about these metrics, thinking about them on a regular basis, analyzing them, assessing them on a regular basis, so you can determine how are we going to move forward. Right. So when you engage a consultant like Eli Patrick and company to think about your strategic plan and your fundraising plan, these questions are going to come up. Like, what's the current data? What's the current data telling us? And how can we build upon it? And do we have justification for building upon it? So let me take another example here. When you look at your revenue versus expenses, we may see revenue increases over the last 3 to 5 years, right? There's a steady increase, right? And there may be steady expense increases to go along with that. One of the questions is that we're going to ask is, are those expenses going to continue to rise? And what are those expenses? Are those expenses operational costs? Are they staff costs? Are they overhead costs, etc.? Right? What are we going to be doing with those expenses? Because if you continue to generate new revenue, will those expenses rise, and will your profitability go down? Now, some people may be saying, well, wait a minute, profitability and nonprofits, how do they go in the same line? No, your nonprofit can be profitable. The difference is at the end of the year, the profitability does not get distributed to any individuals or any entities outside of the nonprofit, because there are no owners of the nonprofit. In fact, if you have a profit at the end of the year, those funds get reinvested back into the organization, the nonprofit itself. This speaks to sustainability as well, particularly if you have a multi-year program or a program that requires a multi-year investment or connection with your customers or your community. It helps to say, well, we have a profit margin of this, and we reinvest those funds into the next program year, which allows us to be thoughtful and to project out our ability to provide services over the next X number of months or X number of years, right? And so that gap serves a purpose for us regarding sustainability. That's incredible. That's a credible a message to share with your donors. So these metrics become key. If you have these metrics in place, no matter what they are, you should have a system in place where you can look at these metrics on a regular basis, monitor them daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, on an annual basis, so that you're looking at how the organization is performing against the standards, and then how we can start to look at the future based upon our current metrics that we're monitoring. Now, this type of information we're covering in our book, Built to Fund, which you see here on the screen. It's our latest book, and it's a strategic workbook designed specifically for nonprofit organizations who are looking to become sustainable, who are looking to raise money, who are looking to build and expand their capacity. You may be in a moment where you want to rethink your fundraising approaches, or you want to think about how to address fundraising in a strategic way with your donors, your partners, your stakeholders, your board, and your staff. If that's you, then this book is for you. Perhaps you're in a position or a situation where you just want to learn how to structure your organization's fundraising approach in a strategic way that aligns with your strategic plan. Well, if you're in that phase in your organization's life cycle, then this book is for you too. So get your copy of my book, Built to Fund, by clicking the link below. You can find it in the description of this video stream. Go ahead and download your copy, and I'm looking forward to your feedback to hear what you have to say about the book because I think it's going to be a helpful, insightful book to help you along your journey. So, we're talking about assessing your financial reality for your nonprofit. We talked about you got to understand your starting point, you got to have key metrics to review. Then this leads to our third point, right? You got to identify the gaps, right? Where are the inconsistencies in your fundraising? Where is the organization missing its goals? And this can be a variety of things. It could be major things or small things, but I think there has to be a honest conversation about where are inconsistencies in your organization. So there may be inconsistencies in your grant writing approach. There may be inconsistencies in your individual donor approach. There may be inconsistencies in your RFP approach or in your revenue generating approach in the open market. Whatever, wherever you raise money, you have to identify those gaps. Now, you will undoubtedly find gaps in areas where you're not currently performing. So, for example, if you are very strong in the RFP world and the grant writing world, and let's say you have a few donors, you're definitely going to be missing in some areas around donors, just because it's not a major part of your revenue, and it's okay. But you may say, well, we want to grow in that. Well, if you want to grow in that, then you got to identify the gaps in your current individual donor approach. But I do want to give a quick example, right, of gaps you may identify in your grant writing approaches, right? So we do a training called Bottleneck Breakers, and this particular training focuses on how to break past the bottleneck that's limiting your fundraising approaches, which is more psychological and operational than you can imagine. But part of the gaps we identify is the fact that there are some organizations that have too few staff and way too much money they're trying to saddle those staff members with to raise, right? So you may have one staff person who's responsible for raising $4 million, right? Well, according to research, right, you should have staff members for every $500,000 to $750,000 you're trying to raise. So if you're trying to raise $4 million, and let's say the average that you want everybody to raise is $750,000, that means in theory you should have roughly, what is that math here? 4 million. Yeah, you should have roughly a little over 5 people on staff, right? And that might be a stretch for a whole lot of nonprofit organizations, particularly at the $4 million mark. But the argument still is, can one person be solely responsible for raising 1 million? So you may not be able to afford 5 people, but you might need to think about having at least more than one, right? That is a major gap. And so having that conversation about how do you go from one to more is a credible conversation to increase the output, to increase consistency, to lower stress, to improve the quality, right? And here's like, let's just have a little bit of that conversation now. So if the data says for every $750,000, you need a person in place and you have a $5 million fundraising budget, that's a little over 5 people. How do you structure that? How do you build that staffing infrastructure in place? So that may not result into 5 full-time people, but that 5 people may result in maybe 1 or 2 full-time people with a couple of part-time folks or virtual staff, right? Who does not have to come in. So you may have a director of fundraising whose main responsibility is to do the interface with major donors, right? So showing up, having conversations, having coffee, being at events, talking about the organization and its programs and articulating the new vision, the new goals of the organization, right? Just being part of the face of the organization with the CEO. That is a key position that has to be done in person. That relationship piece is key. And as we talk about here in our trainings, relationships is the fastest way to raise money, right? You can't beat that. But then you may have a more junior person who's also full-time but based at the office. They're fielding requests, they're responding to emails, they're building the infrastructure for the grant templates, the grant applications. They're doing research for new opportunities. They're searching for new grants. They're searching for new donors. They're searching for new partners. They're doing all of the groundwork, which is equally important, but it's more behind the scenes. So those are your 2 full-time people. Now, you may have some virtual staff that may cost you a lot less money, whose job is to complete the grant applications, whose job is to do a deeper dive in the research. So we may have identified, your other full-time person may have identified 5 funders who on the surface meet the need. But then your frontline staff who does the deeper dive, your virtual staff, they do an analysis, a quality check against the standards of the organization to determine, well, does this particular funder, do these funders meet our 20 criteria points for us to even consider submitting an application? Right. And so those criteria points can be critical in making a quality decision. If they do, then let's move forward and pushing this up the chain to have our director have a face-to-face, if we can, with any of the representatives at this funder, whether it's virtual or in person, so we can start to build a relationship and do a deeper dive in person to determine if that's a fit. All right. If it's determined it's a fit and we're going to submit an application, then that goes back down to your frontline staff who is virtual, who can pump out applications at a steady clip. The other thing we notice in the bottleneck breakers training is that part of the reason most organizations do not reach their financial goals, particularly through grants, is because they don't pump out enough applications. So on average, if you have the right type of staff, right, but they're fielding opportunities, they're going to pump out, but only so much, right? If you have less amount of staff members, they're going to pump out only but so much, right? And so that ratio is going to be super low if you don't have enough staff. This means, and this is also the challenge, this means that if you have a 14-day process of grant writing from beginning to end, and that's just on average, it could be much longer, and you have one staff person who's doing it all, you're only limited to roughly 26 to 28 applications that you're able to submit on an annual basis. That's tight. So if you're a $4 million organization and you have a development director who's doing in-person meetings, who's driving to meetings, who's jumping on Zooms, who's literally working out of the car, who's also in their spare time doing research for opportunities, submitting reapplications, submitting reports, researching opportunities, determining if they're a fit, having meetings with the CEO, having meetings with the staff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And oh, by the way, has to submit applications. This person typically is stretched thin. They're submitting applications at the last minute because their time is very limited. So they're looking at time really not as an opportunity to do more, but they're looking at time to figure out what's the best use of time. And it puts them in a lurch where they're submitting applications super late. They're submitting applications at the last minute. That is a stressor. That is a huge gap, right? Versus the model we're talking about where you have 5 people, 2 full-time and a couple of part-timers or virtual staff that may cost you a lot less. It expands capacity. So the more applications your 3 frontline people can get out, and the process is much faster because there are more systems in place, there are more processes in place, there are more infrastructure pieces in place where decisions can be made a lot faster, a lot sooner. The director of development can focus on relationships only, and the rest of the staff focuses on research and pumping out applications that are of high quality, meets the standard of the organization, that are in alignment with the organization. You're getting out more applications. You're not going to win all of them, but you're going to win a percentage of them, which means that even though you may have a percentage of cold applications, which has a success rate of roughly 30 to 50%, the likelihood of success increases, therefore resulting in greater revenue on top of relationships or funder applications that are tied to relationships. Those tend to have an 80-90% success rate because there's a relationship, a component always active. When you combine those two, you're looking at a higher success rate, therefore closing your gap. How we're doing that? We're breaking the bottleneck of getting out more applications. We're breaking the bottleneck of having more staff. We're breaking the bottleneck of having staff focus on a specific component of fundraising. And not to mention, if you decide to do events, if you decide to do individual donor for raising money for individual donors, your ability to identify specific staff people to have a specific focus on that thing, again, increases capacity while also working on your main book of business and revenue. So identifying the gaps is a lot of work. It's a lot of strategic work. So fundraising isn't, hey, figuring out what we can do to spend money to make money. There's a lot of intentionality that goes behind it. And while we're talking about fundraising, I got to tell you this, that your frontline staff on the program side, On the operation side, they're just as important to this fundraising process because their feedback, their details, their stories, their context, their approach to the work is being documented. And that needs to be talked about in the applications and in the marketing materials. Man, we talk about this a lot more detail in the book Built to Fund, the Fundable Nonprofit. This is a strategic workbook that we designed specifically for you. If you haven't gotten your copy already, click the link below and get your copy to download this ebook today, and we'll have it in your inbox immediately. Yeah. So let's continue to walk through this, right? Assessing your financial reality for your nonprofit. Here's the fourth component here. You got to build a fundraising baseline, right? What's the baseline of unrestricted versus restricted money that you have, right? And some folks really shy away from, but they can't shy away from it. They just don't like restricted money. Everybody wants unrestricted money because it expands capacity, and there's good reason for that, right? There are just some funders who restrict the money so much. But one of the things I've talked about in my course, How to Create a Nonprofit Budget That Pays You Too, is how to write the cost of your staff and your everyday expenses even into a restricted budget. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with clients where the push has been to find unrestricted dollars. Those dollars they're few and far between. And as you can imagine, because they're few and far between, they're highly competitive. So because they're highly competitive and they're few and far between, it puts you in a position where you might not land those opportunities. You got to find them in the first place, right? You got to find them in the first place. So you might not be able to find them first, but when you find them, will you be able to land it? Do you have the relationships in place to land it, or a compelling enough proposal to land it? It's tough. So you're kind of stuck with searching for those opportunities and utilizing your restricted money dollars much more frequently. So then how do you strategically include all of your costs in a restricted application? The other complaint about restricted applications is the limited percentage allocated to administrative costs, which is where folks or nonprofits try to find flexibility as well. That's tough, right? And it comes down to strategic budgeting. It comes down to strategic asset allocation, meaning your human assets, your human resources, and filling that gap and figuring out how to include those folks. At the end of the day, you got to figure out your baseline. So most folks are going to lean on the side of the restricted revenue baseline because the unrestricted is little to non-existent. But once you have that baseline, then you know, okay, this is where we are. This is typically how we do this. This is how much we typically raise. This is how much we allocate our staff to. This is how we allocate our costs to, et cetera, et cetera. So that baseline tied to our current state of our fundraising, looking at the metrics and identifying the gaps helps us identify our current reality of our finances. All this ties into us understanding our current finances and that reality. Now, in a research article written by George Mitchell, Thad Calabrese, and a few of the authors, they wrote an article, did some research on the hidden cost of trustworthiness. This was published May 2022. They did some research on why it's important for nonprofits to be trustworthy and to prove that trustworthiness through their finances. But there was some stuff that they wrote here that I want to talk about that I thought was really important to communicate trustworthiness. And I just want to make sure that I pull up the things I want to highlight before I jump into it. They have a lot of stats and figures here. Okay, let's see here. All right. So there are a couple of things that you need to be thoughtful about as you look at trustworthiness. All right. So here it is. Number one, they say minimize overhead, right? This can include administrative costs and expenses, fundraising expenses, etc. These costs can cause some concern. Now, the tough part about this, though, I get the reason why this came up. The tough part about this is it's awfully hard to operate a nonprofit without administrative overhead, right? You need your C-suite folks. You need your HR. You need your IT, QA. I will say there comes a point in time when you got to determine when to bring some of those extra folks in, whether it's full time, etc. Maybe you might be in a situation financially where you should not carry those costs at a full time rate. And you might need to look at part time or look at consultants who are able to do some of these services at a fraction of the cost, but at maximum value, right? So a consultant in the HR space, a consultant in the fundraising space, a consultant in the IT space, etc., while still having these key positions in place. All right, you got to diversify revenue. Totally agree with that. So you got to have diversified revenue in government grants and contracts, and we see today why that's important given the cuts that are taking place. Private funding, state funding, city funding, partnerships, events. I'm adding all these extra ones. Partnerships, events, sponsorships, etc. All that is key. Individual donors, bequests, all that is key, right? Endowments, investments, revenue from earned income. All right, that's key. Being lean, you got to have lean operations. This ties into minimizing overhead, right? So, do you have too much staff for what you're trying to do? Now, this can be a touchy subject for some people because they may say, I don't have enough staff. One of the things that I would encourage you to think about is if you had more systems, policies, tech, apps in place, could you operate differently with a different staffing structure for what you do? Sometimes we discover that systems can help us be more efficient. And if those systems are operated by staff who knows how to utilize them, leverage them, etc., we can get a whole lot done with a lot less people. Also, avoiding debt, right? You don't want to take on debt, unnecessary debt, or no debt if possible, right? There are organizations that do carry some debt through their line of credit. They pay it off quickly, and this is there as a backup. And as a business owner, totally get why this is the case. But if you're one of those organizations that continues to pursue debt, this might be something you want to think about because how it's viewed and how it can tarnish your financial reliability and how it impacts your trustworthiness on the financial side, which ties into the strategic side, which ties into revenue generation and support. This can make a significant difference in what people think about you and how they view you. Listen, so if you want to walk through this in more detail and develop a cohesive approach, a cohesive strategy with your team, and to think about how do we become more sustainable and how do we become a fundable nonprofit organization. Want to encourage you, click the link below, download your copy of my latest book, Built to Fund. We wrote this book specifically for you. You'll find some content and some key questions to guide you to develop your fundraising plan along the way. We are super excited about this latest release. We believe it's going to help you really, really good. And get your copy by clicking the link below. Folks, that's my time. This is Dr. William Clark. See y'all next time. Be well. Bye, everybody.